Every week I get 2 or 3 people asking me in the comments and through email, how do you become a body language expert? How do I become a body language expert? What courses do I have to take? What degrees do I need to get? What certifications do I need? They ask me everything. So I figured what we do today is we go over that, and I'll tell you exactly what to do and how to go about doing it. There are 1,000 different ways, and then we'll go over my story. As fascinating as it isn't. It's fairly boring with a lot of reading, so I'm going to get to the stuff you're interested in at the first. For people who are here for that, how to become a body language expert, a professional, and then we'll get into how I did it. So if you don't want to watch that, don't worry. I'm not going to put you through it. You can go down the road of education and go to college and take the right classes and courses, and you can learn all you can possibly learn from that about body language and human behavior. There are no, as far as I'm aware, there are no body language classes. It's all psychology, and then you have neurology, which you can put on top of that, which helps with that. But there are no body language courses to take that I'm aware of in colleges and universities today. It's going to take a while. You can't do it really quickly. There's no way to run through it really quickly and say, oh, I took one course and, ooh, now I know it all. No, it doesn't work that way. You can't say, I've read 5 books and now I know everything I need to know. Unless you're just going to be an armchair expert and watch true crime and things on the news and say, hey, this looks like this is happening to me. That's why I don't believe them. Or I do believe them because this happened. But if you want to get into the intricacies of it and the minutia, oh, it's easy. It's easy. For example, you can do this. Let's say you get a book that you really like. That's from a valid person. Paul Ekman, Joe Navarro, Alan Pease, one of those. What you do is this. When you read this book, go to the back in the bibliography, see where they got their information. It's loaded with it. It'll tell you about studies. It'll tell you about where they got it, who they got it from, all that, where you can get it, what books you need, what studies you need to find. It's all in there. And that's just one book. Go to a Joe Navarro book. Man, he loads his up. Go read all that stuff he's talking about in there. Go check it out. He's telling you what he's learned, and then he's telling you where he got it. It's incredible. And people don't see that. I'm sure some do. I did. It's so easy to find that information and to get it. And once you see where it is and you know where to start going, you go there all the time until they hate you. If you end up talking to these people and you talk to them so much, they get tired of you. And that's okay. That's okay. Call these universities. Find out who these professors are that do these studies or these scientists are that do studies, and call them up. Email them. Ask them what's going on. What do they know that's new? What do they think's coming up? What do they think's going to happen? Ask them questions. They love answering that stuff. Believe me, they love it. And they'll send you other places to get more information. So don't be under the impression that you have to go to college or it's too late for me. I can't start. I'll never be a professional. You can be a professional. You really can. I'm telling you how to do it. The key is observation, learning how to observe properly. That's number one. Number two is you keep the mindset of, I am a beginner. I'm just starting out in this. And no matter how much you learn, no matter how long you are in the process of educating yourself, you always approach it as a beginner. And the term body language became popular in the 70s after this guy Julius Fast wrote a book called Body Language. And it was how you could understand what someone was thinking, what someone might do from how they were acting and how they were behaving and what their body language looked like. And for the most part, you can. Most of the time, a lot of the time. But it's not a perfect science. It's not a pseudoscience either. A lot of people always say, what do you think? People always say it's a pseudoscience. What do you think about that? Greg and I were on Dr. Phil's show 2 weeks ago after for Dr. Phil's town hall. That's right after the debate. I think it was after the debate. And he took questions from the audience. That's what you do in a town hall. And one guy stood up and he said, hey, listen, what do you say about people saying that body language is a pseudoscience? And my answer was the same one all the time. If there wasn't so much science behind it, if there weren't so many studies that proved the things we talk about are true, I'd believe it. I'd be with you. And what's happened to this guy and a lot of people that are into body language, they see people giving you bad information, incomplete and incorrect information that they've just Googled. They didn't go into the studies. They didn't learn about it. They didn't find out where this came from and why it's true. And once they read that and learned that, they didn't go, let me just see if that works. Let me see if that works. And so they'll go out and try it themselves, or they'll do it in a real life application and see how it functions in their world or in their situation. Or they didn't read more studies about it. Or they didn't talk to somebody who is an interrogator or someone who is an interviewer or someone who understands that stuff thoroughly, a scientist, a professor. And a lot of the things you hear, like on TikTok and Instagram, a lot of that stuff is mind-blowingly incorrect. So there's a lot of that out there. And that's one of the reasons people think that body language from professionals is a pseudoscience as well. And it isn't. Because like I was saying earlier, there's too many studies, too much scientific proof that if you're telling the valid and correct information, that it's right, that it isn't pseudoscience. It is a science when you look at it. Everything I talk about, everything I tell you, you can go find this stuff. And you can find the studies for it, or I won't be telling you about it. I always say this, and so I'll say it one more time in case there's somebody watching new that hasn't seen anything I've done before. I don't talk about anything that I don't know for dang sure is true and has been shown in studies and proved by studies to be true. Every now and then, if there's something I say that isn't in those studies, but it's from my experience, I'll say, in my experience, this happens, or I've always seen this, or I had somebody tell me this and I've seen it and that looks true as well. And I'll also say, there are no studies to back that up. That's just my experience. However, I don't train that if I'm training police officers or a military, I don't teach them that. I don't say that because I don't want them confused with anything that might not be valid, because that might not be valid. It might be my experience, but it's happened every time. But it doesn't mean it's scientifically proven, because it isn't. It's just my experience. And I don't want to give somebody information that might ruin their dream, that might make them lose their life savings, that might let them go free, or that might get them killed if they don't use that information properly, or they have the wrong information or incomplete information. And that's really important to me. And I stand by that. So I only talk about things that I've studied, that I know about, and I know what the studies are, and I know it can be proven, everything I'm talking about, from a scientific perspective. In a lot of cases, from a medical perspective. And I didn't go to college for that. I don't have degrees in psychology. I don't have any degrees in criminology or abnormal psych. I don't have any of that. I went to Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky, and I took psychology and absolutely hated it. I didn't like it. It wasn't going over the stuff I was interested in, at all. So I ended up going to music school. We'll talk about that in a minute. So as you become a body language expert, you've got to keep that beginner's mindset happening. You've got to keep that. Like there could be something happening that you've learned, and there could be more to it, or they could find out it isn't true. Maybe that study or those studies, for some reason whatsoever, hadn't found one where they're all wrong. But what if they are? You've got to look at it as a beginner, and you've got to keep collecting as much information as you possibly can. If you run into somebody that says, I'm studying behavior and whatever it is, ask them questions. Ask them the simple beginning questions, because there may be new stuff they've learned. There may be a whole new thing out there that you're not aware of. So ask questions. You got to keep that beginner's mindset. That's so important. So there's that. Now let's talk about my story. It's, like I said before, as fascinating as it isn't. So here's how I became a body language expert, a professional. Okay. When I was a little kid, my father was a doctor. Not just when I was a little kid, he was a doctor my whole life. And we lived next door to the elementary school. We lived in Louisa, Kentucky. And my brother he wasn't in school yet. I was in the first grade, and my sister was in the third grade. She must have been in third grade. And what my mom would do, since my dad was the only doctor in the town, and we didn't get to see him very much back then when we were little, she would come and get us at lunchtime. She'd bring my little brother with her, and she'd come get next door and get me and my sister and me, I don't know if it's grammatically correct, And she'd take us down to the hospital, which is just a few blocks down from the house, tiny little town. And we'd eat lunch with my dad in his office. We'd get something to eat that there. And in his office, you could see out into the waiting room. And as we're sitting there in the waiting room, I said to my dad, because I saw these two cats I knew, Robert Bellamy and Billy Elkins. I saw them in the waiting room, and I said, hey, man, I know those guys. What are they doing here? And my dad said, he did this. He went, well, Robert has an earache, and he's been up all night with his mom, and she's been up all night with him, and he's here to get that seen about. We're going to get it fixed. And I said, well, what about Billy? He went, Billy's pretending he's sick. Nothing's wrong with him. And he's here because he doesn't want to go to school or whatever the reason is. He wants to stay home, and his mother brought him down here. So we're going to check that out and see what might be going on there. But he's not sick. And I thought, okay, well, how do you know that? That's nice. How do you know that? He said, well, let's take a look. And so we looked out there, and he said, now, you watch, or take a look at Robert. He said, see how he's got his head leaning against his mom. He's got his hand on his ear because he had an earache. And I said, yeah. He said, that tells me his ear hurts, because he keeps touching his ear. And he's leaning against his mom, not moving a whole lot. And I said, yeah. And I said, and then when he does move, he'll rub his hand on his leg like this. And he rubbed his leg, man. And I said, yeah. And the kid started doing that. It's like, yeah. He goes, now let's look at his mother. I said, see how she looks tired? I said, yeah. He said, see how her hair, we knew her, see how her hair doesn't look the way it usually looks? She doesn't have any makeup on? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, that tells me she's been up all night. So his ear hurts. That's real. He has an earache, and we're going to get that fixed. He said, now let's look at Billy. So I looked over at Billy. He said, see how Billy's legs, he was sitting on a little bench, see how his legs are dangling like that? And I said, yeah. He said, see how he's looking at that magazine? He had like highlights or whatever it is you read as a little kid when you're at the dentist or the doctor. He was sitting there reading this little magazine thing. I said, yeah. He said, see how his eyebrows are up? I said, yeah. He said, now in just a minute, here's what's going to happen. He's going to make a frowny face. That's what he called it, frowny face. He's going to look up at his mom from the side. He's going to say something to her, and she's going to look down at him because she's reading a magazine or something there. And she's going to put her arm around him and pat him on the shoulder, and then he's going to go back to look at his little magazine. His eyebrows are going to go back up, and his legs are going to start kicking. And I said, well, okay, let's see if that happens. So we watched for a minute, and son of a gun, that happened. Just what he said was going to happen happened. My mind was blown. I couldn't believe that he could see the future. I thought he was magic. And I was like, how do you do that? Well, how'd you know that? He said, because people behave pretty much the same, all of them. I didn't understand that really. I thought I did at the time, but I didn't. But he's still trying to make it really simple for me. And I just thought it was magic. So that sparked my interest in somebody being honest and somebody being deceptive, because it was so plain for me to see that once he pointed that out. It was so obvious. I was like, wow. And he told me it's like that with most everything and most everyone when you're in certain situations. However you say that to a little kid, because I remember him telling me that, but not in those words. But I remember that concept. So that was my jumping off point for behavior and what was going to happen next, because I'm fascinated with what somebody's going to do next. And I got interested in somebody lying and telling the truth when in that same little town in Louisa, Kentucky, my brother and I had these little plastic boats we were playing with in the living room. And in the living room, there was this big grate that was on the floor. And under the grate was the furnace that heated up the whole house. It was wintertime. And my mom and dad would always say, don't put anything on the grate there because it'll melt. You'll melt it. We're like, yeah, we won't do that. So we're playing these little boats there in the living room. And for some reason, Mitch put this boat on there and it started to melt and it got stuck to the grate. And we both kind of freaked out. He finally pulled it off, but there was all this melted stuff on there. So we run upstairs, right? We bolted. And of course, it stunk the house up. It started smelling. So my dad and mom come in there. They see what's happened. My dad says, hollers upstairs, hey guys, come down here a minute. So we come downstairs. And he got my sister, Ellen, to come downstairs too. said, y'all come down here, man. He said, who did this? And we were like, hey, I don't know, wasn't me. We were all saying that. And me and my sister and I weren't going to, rat on my brother. So my dad went like this, okay, everybody line up. So we all stood in line. He goes, go like this. Let me see your hands. Really? All right, man. We held up our hands. He knew Mitch did it. He knew he did it. But so we held up our hands, looked at my sister's hands for a minute, like that. And then he looked up at her, said, okay. Then he scooted over to me. And I was standing like that, and he looked at my hands. He looked up at me for a minute, looked me in the eyes. Then he looked at my hands again, and looked back in my eyes. I said, okay. Then he went over to my brother. My brother's hands is younger, and he has his hands up like this. And he had this look on his face. My dad looked down at his hands, looked up at him, looked down at his hands. Then he went like that, and my brother started crying. And my mom started laughing, not out loud. It wasn't really loud, but it was loud enough for me to hear. But he started crying, and so my dad got after him for that. He didn't spank him or anything, but he said, here's, you shouldn't do that or whatever, however you get after little kids at that age. And gosh, it was hilarious. So I was like, and we were all like, oh no, he can tell if we're lying or not. That's not good. That's not good enough for anybody. That's not good. But I remember thinking that and thinking, but I want to know how to do that. I need to know how to do that. That's potent. This cat can tell the future, and now he can tell when somebody's lying. So I wanted to be like my dad. I wanted to be able to do that too. So that's where my interest in seeing if someone was lying or telling the truth, not just to me, but to other people. If you could watch them and tell if they were lying to somebody or trying to get something from somebody. It just got bigger and bigger as I went along. So anyway, so my dad, and when I told him that, again, however you tell your dad that as a, 10-year-old or however old you are in the first grade, I want to learn about that. I want you to show me that. And he said, all right, well, that's what we'll do. So every time we go somewhere, I'd say, what's wrong with that guy? And it'd be somebody limping, He said, oh, that guy, he's hurt his ankle. He's hurt his ankle. That's why he's limping around like that. There's a guy on crutches. One time we were in a restaurant, and this guy was on crutches, and he had a cast on his foot. And I said, hey, man, what's wrong with that guy? He said, oh, he's broken. He's got a broken foot. So that's why he's got crutches. So what's he going to do next? And then my dad went, well, when he gets to the table, he's going to put both his crutches in his left arm, his left hand. He's going to pull the table out with his right hand. He told me the side of the chair he's going to get in. He's going to sit down. When he does, he's going to make a frowny face like his foot hurts. And he's going to move his foot up. And then he'll put his crutches right there on the table, between him and the table. Right there, he'll rest them on there. Obviously, me and you are going to know that now, but I didn't know that as a kid. And the guy did that, and again, blew my mind. And I said, how did you know that? And he explained to me, he's right-handed, so he wants to put his crutches in his left hand, hold it with his hand, pull the chair out with that, then sit down. Then when he moves his foot over, it's going to hurt. He would explain these things to me, the process, the protocol for what was happening in all kinds of situations. We'd go out to eat, we'd go to the store, whatever it was, and I'd ask, he'd say, okay, here's what's going to happen. And then he'd say, here's how you know, because. So then it went from that. And then I just kept wanting to know what was going to happen next. From then on, I was just fascinated with that. And behavior, and I guess it would be body language at the same time, but that term really wasn't big yet, because at that time, it was about 1971 or 2. And I think Julius Fast, I think his book came out in 1970. And my dad had that book too. He ended up getting that, because I kept talking to him about behavior and stuff. So he found that book, and he read the book, and he would tell me parts of it. He wouldn't read me verbatim what it was in the book. We'd say, well, in this book, it says this happens when this happens. I was like, fascinating. So he would tell me these things. And I'm sure I could have read it at the time, but I wouldn't have understood it. But he broke all that down for me. So I thought that was really cool of him to do, take the time to do that. Some idiot kid. But man, he did that. And then when he'd learn things from studies he'd run across at the hospital, or from another doctor, or from one of the scientist guys he knew, he'd tell me about that too. He'd go, look what I found today. I learned this today. What do you got? And he'd tell me about it. So as I grew up, even when we moved from there, to make a long story short, we ended up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and that's where they developed most of the nuclear weapons for America. Now even, Maybe you've heard of it. I don't know. It's where they created the nuclear bombs that America dropped on Japan. Fat boy and little man, little man, fat man and little boy. However how that goes, I'm dyslexic, so I never get that straight. But that's where those were developed, that were dropped on Japan. So the people that designed all that, there's so much going on here. And my dad ended up being the chief of staff at the Oak Ridge Hospital, which is the only hospital in Oak Ridge. Still today, it's the only one. And he was the head of the radiology department. He was a radiologist at this time, because he went from being a general practitioner to surgeon and then radiologist. And so he knew all these scientists. He'd go give talks out to the plants where all these guys were and got to know a lot of them, which was fascinating, I thought, as well. So he learned about these studies about behavior as well from people there who were the guys who were, I guess I can talk about that, were hunting spies at that time, because there's always spies in Oak Ridge, trying to learn as much as they can about the nuclear secrets we have and all that kind of thing. So there were people there who did that. And he got to know some of them. I'm sure that's where he got some of the information that he would tell me about behavior. So I learned a lot from that. Trying to think what else might be exciting during all that. So anyway, I ended up once I graduated from high school, a lot of other things happened in there, which are boring and we won't go over, but I ended up going to Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky. That's where I took psychology, absolutely hated it, left and went to Berklee College of Music. And at Berklee, which I absolutely loved, I studied guitar there and became a session player, to make a long story short, going through school and stuff. And so I did sessions. I became staff guitar player at this place called Mission Control Studios. Really treated me great there. I learned a lot from those guys. Michael Johnson, Maurice Starr, Eban Kelly, Jimmy Randolph. Those guys treated me so well, treated me so good, and taught me so much that was ridiculous. And so many big records came out of that studio and from that group of people that were done. That's where I learned how to be a producer during that time. From doing sessions, became a producer. I still did sessions, though, because I really liked that a lot. And at the same time, I was still trying to learn as much as I possibly could about human behavior and body language. What was going to happen next? Fascinated with it. Then when I left Boston, I ended up moving to Nashville to be a producer and a session guy as well, because I still like doing records, playing other people's records. So I was a session player and I was a producer and became a producer during all that. Really came into producing at that point. I was doing remixes and all that stuff, but it wasn't don't get me wrong, you can do remixes and be a producer. You are a producer and do remixes. I did tons of those. A lot of those, 90% of those country remixes back in the 90s that you heard, Fatty did them. Yeah, I really did. No kidding. Go look it up. You'll see. And comedy as well. I got into, I was at Warner Brothers at the time. They'd give me a record deal. I didn't want a record deal. I just wanted to be a producer. So they said, okay, we're going to give you a record, because I had been doing some other records they had heard and said, well, you should be a producer here. And I was like, oh, okay. So I got an office and the whole thing, but I wasn't a corporate guy. Again, I mean, it'd be a great gig if you wanted to do that and keep that gig. It'd be awesome. But I ended up doing, they said, we got a comedian. He sold like 3,000 units. And it was 10,000 units. And we want to sell like 30,000 by Christmas or whatever. And so I said, well, who is it? Because I was always into comedy. I said, Jeff Foxworthy. I said, oh man, the guy's hilarious. And I think the record might have already been. I think the record was already out. Yeah, because they were going to try and sell it. And I said, I tell you, I know what we should do. I'll do a single. Let me take his live stuff and I'll put music around it. And whatever his big thing is, whatever his big bid is, I'll put that in there. And we'll sell the squad out of that. Because at the time they were making these $1 million videos, which had never been done before. Spending $1 million on a video, they do it now, it's nothing. Back then, they just started doing that. They were making these really slick videos. And I said, well, let me do this single, and then we'll do a real cheap video. And that'll be a contrast against what's happening musically and from a video perspective. And it's Warner Brothers. I know you can get it on there on CMT. So that'll get more attention. We'll sell the squad out of that thing. And I think they did that eventually. We ended up doing that and sold, I think we sold 3 million by Christmas, something like that. It was some unbelievable number. It's in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most selling comedy album of all time. You Might Be a Redneck If. And I'm the one that started those doing singles for comedians. I did a whole album of those things for them, sold the squat out of that too, you know. So, but anyway, so there's that. But at the same time, still understanding what was happening from a body language perspective. Because at this time, I was having to make deals with artists and studios and get them deals. And I was reading the body language of the people that we were going to visit, that we were going to pitch to, their act to, because this is where I learned how to pitch to, was from being in Boston and in Nashville as well. And I would see how they acted, and if they were going to say, "Okay, we'll sign this act," or we're gonna do it, and we're gonna put everything you possibly need behind this act, we'll do that too. And I could see from how they were acting if they really were going to do that, or they were just saying that. Sometimes they would sign you so to get you out of the muck and out of the race with their artists they already had, and they would do something with you later, but not at first. They just wanted you out of the way so that other artists could do really well. So I could tell that if they were doing that, and then the deal would sound wonderful, but I said, we don't need to do that. Don't do that one. So managers would hire me to come and sit in their meetings and watch and help them decide what decisions to make about what deals they did as well. So, and then record labels caught on to what was happening, and so they're literally, for some of them, their body language changed. They would act differently when I'd show up. But there's that. But still educating myself and learning about body language. Still learning from Vanderbilt at that time, finding out who were the people in the neurology department who were dealing with the brain, that the parts that I wanted to know and the behavior parts that I wanted to know about. Found out who they were. And finally, they got, they didn't like me anymore because I was asking them. I had long hair and 2 earrings and I was real skinny and stuff. I looked really cool. Ugh. And so you can imagine somebody like that coming up and asking about behavior. If you're a scientist, you really want a bunch of those, somebody like that bothering you. So that's when I still would call the universities and things and ask them. One endpoint was, I think it was UCLA, because I'd heard back when I lived in Boston, everybody was talking about this thing called the 738-55 rule of communication. That's when that had just dropped. And I started hearing that a lot. That didn't sound right to me. It was communication is 7% the words you used, 38% was the tone of voice you used, and the 55%, the rest of it was body language. And it just hit me wrong. It didn't sound right at all. I can see why they would think that, but it just, from what I had learned since I was a kid up to this point, that didn't make sense to me. So I said, I'll call this guy, Albert Morabian, that everybody's saying, it's his thing. I'm going to call him and ask him about it. Maybe there's something, taking the mindset of the beginner. I'm going to ask him to explain it to me because I don't get it. I'm not just going to accept it because I don't understand it. So I called him up. I finally found him. I think there was no internet back then, nothing like that. It was a real pain. It took me a long time, but I found him and I called him up. Really nice guy, just a fantastic guy, really nice. I said, hey, listen, you don't know me, but I heard this thing, 738-55 rule. I don't understand it. Will you explain it to me? And he said, the reason that it sounds wrong, the reason that it's hitting your ear wrong is because I didn't say that. That's not what I'm talking about. Then he explained to me what that was, how that came about was he had another study he had done that dealt with that, but it was from one word and one picture. And he explained, it doesn't take that long, look it up, you'll see what I'm talking about. But it was a completely different study, and somebody had misinterpreted that and came up with this other thing because it sounded cool and they talked about it. And it took off. It caught fire. It went viral back then. I guess that's what happened. And everybody believed it. To this day, you'll hear people come out and sometimes they'll open up with, communication, that's 7%. And it's just, I don't want to vomit when I hear that because it's not. I did a whole TEDx talk on body language myths. It was called How to Kill Your Body Language Frankenstein and Inspire the Villagers. And it was all about the myths of body language. And that was one of the number one things that I covered in there because I called him before I did it. And I called him up and said, hey, man, remember we had called you a long time. He actually remembered me calling. He said, you were one of the first people to call me and ask about that. I do remember that. I said, well, I'm going to be giving a TEDx talk on that. I'm going to use your picture too. Is that cool? And he's like, yeah, you can use my picture. And so I did. So I got to connect with him. Remember how many years later that was? Oof, long time. So that to this day, you'll still see that it's catching on that's it's called the myth, that's community, the 738-55 myth. But some people don't, since they, like I said before, a lot of people give you incomplete and incorrect information. That's why you'll hear that still, because they didn't do it right. They're not doing what I was explaining to you, the best way to go about doing if you're not going to go to college and do all that, you know. So they're just Googling stuff or hearing something, remember it and writing it down. And they'll go out and they'll get hired to go talk somewhere, and you'll hear them just puke that up, and gets on my last nerve. Anyway, so you don't want to be that guy or that girl, that woman, or you know what I'm saying. You don't want to be that person. So don't be a hack. Don't be doing that. Learn, get the details and stuff, right? So when people started giving music away, like on Napster and all those things, I saw this thing coming where in music, there was going to be no money in selling things. There was going to be anything to sell. And when I would tell these heads of the labels, say, look, here's what's coming. Here's what we need to do, because this is all going away soon. We need to get out in front of this, because you're not going to have anything to sell anymore. And they're like, that's, they didn't believe me. Not that I was some big forethinker, but it was obvious. Anybody could see it coming. You could, I'm sure you saw it too. And I said, there's not going to be any CD stores anymore. That's going away. And then I did get laughed out of a couple of things. I was at IBMA. I was a member of that, and I was a part of the big group of people that get together and talk about all the things that would happen in bluegrass that year and that kind of thing. They almost kicked me out of this big meeting they have every year because I told them that. I said, CDs are going away. This is all going away. We got to find a different way for the artists to make money, because selling things out the window. And they all laughed at me. There were a couple of other labels that laughed at me now. And then when everything went away, they're like, well, I remember you told me that this happened. And I was like, yeah, too late now, man. Can't help you, dude. Sorry. Too late. And there was nothing they could do. And they started doing these other deals, taking advantage of the artists that really got on my last nerve. So anyway, so I retired from the music business back then, I guess in 2009, 10 or 11, right in there. I got out of it. And so then I started, so I was like, well, what am I going to do? Because I retired. So I went to the Entrepreneur Center. I met a guy named Chris Blands, and he said, hey, man, there's a place called the Entrepreneur Center. If you have an idea, they give you money and they help you develop this idea. And I said, well, what's the idea? And he told me the idea. I said, look, man, I can get us in. So I can make a pitch that'd get us in, because I knew how to pitch, because I'd pitched for so long from living in Boston, pitching bands and acts, get them deals. I had that down. So from the finances to everything else. And I said, I can do that if we just develop this idea a little bit, we'll get it. So make a long story short, we got it at the Entrepreneur Center in the accelerator there. And there are incubators and accelerators. Accelerators go really quickly, and incubators you stay for a long time. And they funded part of it and said, oh, we're going to help you develop this, which is great. I thought it was really cool. But the pitches just blew. They were horrible. So when people were pitching, I said, dude, why don't you do this when you say something? Because at that time, I'd already been giving talks on body language and explaining it to other people and to police officers that I knew. Hey, man, here's what's going to happen when you see this and that kind of thing. So we get together little groups, and I'd explain it to them what's happening. So little training groups. And I said, so pitch it like this when you do it. And a lot of people were under the impression that we were in competition with each other in the accelerator. We weren't. We were all together. But that sort of teaching everybody how to pitch got sort of everybody on the same page and together. And at the same time, there's a guy named Michael Burcham that ran that place. Brilliant guy. He's like the King Kong of healthcare entrepreneurs in Nashville. He's got it figured out. That's the guy. If you're an entrepreneur, I'm not saying go hunt him up because he'll shoot me, but that's the guy. If you hear about him, whatever it is, it's true. He's the guy when it comes to entrepreneur. He can tell you how a business runs, why it isn't working, and say, if you fix this, this, and this, I'll bet it'll work, because I've seen him do that and it worked every time. Okay. So he said to me, listen, I see you're teaching these people how to pitch. Why don't you come be the entrepreneur in residence here, and you can if you'll teach these guys how to pitch. And I said, love to do it. Let's make a really long story short. So I became the entrepreneur in residence at the Nashville Entrepreneur Center and stayed there from 2011 to 2017. And what I would do there is I would train the new startups and the new CEOs, little entrepreneurs in there. And I say little because they're just starting to grow like little seedlings, and teach them how to pitch and give them that view of it's all about behavior. And it's getting these people to trust you as soon as they see you, not being dishonest about it. Because if I saw someone I thought was being dishonest about all that, I wouldn't have anything to do with them. I'd say, can't help you, dude. I don't believe in what you're doing. And it'll hurt my numbers as far as people getting funded. Because every person that I trained there, every one of them got funded, be it a contest, be it for whatever their funding was they were asking for from investors, whatever it was. Everyone I trained, to the man, to the woman, to the child. Sometimes there were little kids who would come in. They'd help them get their product or service up and running. I got them investment from their pitches. Every one of them. And the ones I didn't work with, some of them did okay, and got funded, but not to the degree they should have been, in my opinion, anyway. That much might be my attitude toward it. They may have done just fine. But my point is, everybody that I trained in these skills that I had and showed them how to do it, they all got funded. So then I started doing classes at Vanderbilt and Belmont and Lipscomb and UT. They say, dude, you can do that. Come over and teach our entrepreneurs. So I'd go over there and do a class on pitching for their entrepreneurs, or all those, and for their law classes. A lot of them I would do lectures and do a class on law and body language when it came to being in court and what you look for when you're having voir dire. A lot of people call it jury selection because you don't have to say voir dire, because voir dire is spelled voyeur dire. If you say it in English and you hear some people call it that, voyeur dire, but it's pronounced voir dire, and that's when you don't select the jury. You just figure out who's not going to be in there. That's what you do. You say, no, because when you have a jury come in, you can get rid of a certain number of them, and you have to choose the ones you don't want in there. So they let you do that. To make another long story short, that's called voir dire. So I'd train them in how to do that and what to look for when it came to that. I did that for psychology classes, criminology classes, a couple of other types of classes. I can't remember what they were. But it's all along the same thing where you can use body language. And the thing is, if you become an expert, you can take whatever skills you have in body language and you can lay that over top of just about anything. But when you start getting specific, when you start dealing with law enforcement and you start dealing with military, you've got to be real specific and you've got to be spot on, right on the money when you do that. So like I said before, so you don't give them information that might get them killed because you didn't pay attention and aren't sure about the info you have. They may think something's going to happen because they did this, because I'm fascinated with what's going to happen next. They did this, this, and this. Therefore, this will happen. And if it doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen because I missed a study in there that says it only happens this percentage of the amount of time or something, and somebody does something wrong, gets hurt or something, or I couldn't live with myself. So I have to have those things. That's why I feel so strongly about you paying attention to what you're learning and making sure you get that down. Making sure you have the full and deep, in-depth understanding of everything you talk about. That's important. Going back to studying. You don't need to go to college to do that. You can learn it yourself, but make sure you learn it. Okay, make sure you get all the information you possibly can and make sure that information is valid. So important, and I'm going to say that all the time when this comes up. During all this, then I met a guy named Clay Phillips, and he was a mediator. And I thought, well, okay, he's a mediator, right? And he was, they call them submariners. I thought it was submariners, but he used to be on a submarine. He was in the Navy and was a potent cat in the Navy. I don't remember what he was or how he became that, but he had some wild stories about being on a submarine. Scared me to death. So anyway, I met Clay. Clay said, look, I've got this thing I'm opening called I Center. And there and this was the guy, Clay was the guy. If you needed mediation, to learn about, that's the guy you went to, right? He was the guy to get specific certifications in mediation. Clay was the guy to go see. Okay, and to give you an idea about this guy, what kind of guy he was, when I first got there and he was telling me all the things that would happen, it would be late in the day and I'd be there after training something, whatever group I was training. And he would train not only people that want to be mediators, there would be police trainings there, military trainings there. There would be all kinds of things that would happen there, and all kinds of people that would be in these trainings to learn how to mediate and be a mediator. There are federal judges in there in some of these courts, in these things that he trained. So that's where I met, started training federal judges as well. So I would do some training for Clay and his stuff. Back to my point, though, hang on. It would be late in the day, and this is when it dawned on me that this guy was the King Kong of training mediators, okay? And he was good at it. We're talking about something, and we're talking about when it comes, he would always explain to me negotiations and deal making and mediations and how that works. I was fascinated with that. And one day late in the day, we were talking. So I've got somebody coming in and we're going to do mediation work because he'd stayed late. I said, well, who is it? He said, oh, it's a divorce situation I'm doing. Okay, that's great. Because in mediation, that's one of the things you do as a mediator. You mediate. You do mediation for divorces, right? I thought that's what he did, which he did. But the level of these divorces, they had this big room and this big bay door that would open up, And I said, what is the bay door for? I asked him for, if we need to pull anything in here or whatever, move things around. So this evening, this late in the day thing I'm telling you about, I'm sitting there and these two guys come in, they left that big bay door open that rolls up, and in pulls this big SUV, right? Big black one. The windows are all, shaded, and the door shuts. The door opens. I'll get these two really famous people from Nashville, and they're getting a divorce, apparently, and he's going to mediate that. He never said, guess who I'm mediating? Guess what this happened? And that wasn't the only time stuff like that happened, right? And so that's the kind of guy he was. He would have all this going on and never say anything about it. Well, a lot of us do that. You have stuff going on, you don't say, guess what I did? Number two, who cares? Number one, who cares, right? But I just blew my mind. I was like, oh, okay, now I see what I'm dealing with. That's why this cat knew so much. That's why he was so good at it, right? So at iCenter, he was really good to me, really good to me. Clay was really, really, still know him, great guy. And so that's where I started training police officers and people in the military. And like I said, federal judges, all kinds of people would come through there. And he let me have my own classes in there as well, my own trainings as well. So I could, whoever I wanted to train, whatever group could come in there, and it was a pro-looking place to train, right? It was a wonderful situation there. At the same time, like I said before, I'm also doing talks, everything from healthcare to entrepreneurs, and doing the big, they have the big healthcare get-togethers. A lot of times I go give talks at those. Those are my favorite, the healthcare ones, because I really got in. And I guess it's from my dad explaining to me how healthcare works from the patient's perspective, not just the doctors, how the patients feel as you go through. So I came up with a couple of things that a lot of hospitals use for in their protocol to help the patients feel better about being there and not be all, too stressed or anything like that, to stay not just calm, but feel good about what was happening. The patient engagement loop, that's one thing I came up with that's helped a whole lot of people. And I came up with that because I ended up having cancer, right? There's a guy in Knoxville, Tennessee, Dr. Overholt. And I went in because everybody in my family gets their parathyroid taken out. It starts squirting out too much calcium, and then you get kidney stones and all this other stuff. So you have to have them out, right? So, and he's the guy you go see. He's done I forget how many billions of these probably that he's taken out. And I go in to get mine out. No big deal. You go in that day, you go home after it's, a few hours after it's over. I don't think you spend the night there for that. So I go in and he's going to take my parathyroid out. And he goes in. I'm like, all right, I see y'all want to get out of this. They put me under and I come out. And when I wake up, he's there too. He's there sitting on the bed. And I was like, oh no. And I said, hey man, or every you talk when you're like it. I was like, what's going on? He said, well, I found cancer. I was in there taking it out, and your thyroid found cancer in that. I looked at it and then I didn't feel right about it. Didn't say it looked like I had cancer. It said I just didn't feel right about it. So I was in there biopsying the other stuff as you do when you have your parathyroid taken out. I biopsied your thyroid, came back cancer. So I had to take that out. I was like, oh, wait, is this bad? He's like, no, if you're going to get it, this is the kind you want. I said, okay. So and everything ended up fine. I'm fine now, but I had it out. So after that, if you've had cancer, you'll understand. You're always afraid you're going to have it again. That's, oh no, it's back or whatever, right? So when I was going through that, after that, you have to do radiation and some other things just to make sure they get it all, you know. And so going through that process, I didn't like it at all because I went back to Nashville after he took it out. And he took it out because he was the guy that took out my mom's and my sisters and all that. My dad, being a doctor, said, this is the guy you want, man. So he's the guy. And so when I went back to Nashville, the process I went through after that, I didn't like it at all because the way I was treated in that system. And I saw as I was going through it, I was like, I see these problems and this can be fixed. It needs to be fixed. And that's how, and to make a long story short, that's how I came up with the patient engagement loop, which, like I said before, some hospitals use it now. I find it to work like a charm because I was scared to death and noticed everybody else in there was scared to death too, because they were afraid theirs was back or they had whatever disease they were worried about, right? So, but there's a protocol you can follow when somebody first shows up that keeps your stress level really low during all that, because there are things that happen in there during that process that make you feel alone and by yourself, even though you've got somebody with you. It just scares you half to death. But there's a way to go through that, having my whole life been into behavior and body language and trying and looking for stress in people and see what fires it off on them, seeing this situation and going, oh, here are the places that cause stress. Here's how you can get rid of that. Here's how you can make it not happen. And a lot of times doctors get sued all the time. I mean, they get sued. People sue them just all the time. My dad didn't get sued, not once. And he quit being a doctor, I think, when he was 65, 70, something like that, went forever. So I never got sued, but everybody else around him was getting sued. And it was like, why aren't you getting sued, man? And he explained to me why he wasn't, because he would treat people like they were at our house. You know, he was, and not just nice to them, but there's a way to approach people to make that. And it starts with the receptionist in this loop I've created. You know, if you're not into healthcare, I'm almost done with this, but that keeps your stress levels really down, really low. And when you talk with your doctor, there's things that he'll do to make you feel like and know that he really cares, that he's worried about you. Because I used to ask somebody, what's the most important thing for a doctor, you know, to do for a patient not to get sued? We talk about that all the time. And he would say, when you go to the doctor, you want a doctor that's worried about you. You want one that looks worried about you. You want one that you know is worried about you and is going to make sure you're going to be okay. So that's the mindset he had, because he did worry about people. I remember he worried about them all the time. His patients, I don't think you're supposed to do. It's probably not good for you, but he would worry about him. You think about it, he never told us what or said, I'm worried about this guy, but I could see it on him because having studied that from when I was a child, up to then I could see it on him and I knew he was worried about something, and come to find out that's what it was after he retired. We talked about that, not specific people, but specific situations of people who had something that he worried about. But he said, that's what you want, a doctor that's worried about you. And there are things that doctors can do to let that person know they're worried about him. Because a lot of times doctors are just really analytical and they're really, you know, look like they don't give a shit. They're just, So there are different ways to go through that process to connect with your patient. So they actually like you because you like them and they actually feel like they know you. So anyway, so part of the patient engagement loop is that. And that's why I get to talk to a lot of healthcare places and a lot of hospitals and health situations. Even dentists are into that now because they see that coming as well. You know, that happens to them a lot. So in the healthcare world, I sort of became known as the body language healthcare mentor, you know, the body language mentor for healthcare. I actually have that on my website at scottrouse.com, and that's what it says. So there's that. So I do all kinds of talks and things. And then when I got into during all this, here's what I forgot to tell you about the interrogation, how I got into that. During all this, and when I was in Nashville, a buddy of mine, my best friend, I'm not going to say his name on here, but it rhymes with Jason, said, you know what, man, you're so into this. I think you'd really be into interrogation. You'd make a great interrogator. I can see how you look at things, how you ask questions. You should look into that. You should really check that out. I said, dude, I don't know where to start. He said, I know where to start. I'll tell you exactly what to do. There's a thing called the read technique. I'll help you get in it. I'll tell you exactly what to do, and I'll help you get in it. And you'll learn all about that. Man, you'd be great at it. I said, well, okay, let's do that. So I did everything he said. He helped me get in. And the first interrogation course I took was the read technique. And you can take like the first part of it, then you can take the advanced part for the second half of it. You can take one, I forget how many days the first part is, and the advanced part's 2 or 3 days as well. I mean, I don't remember how long the advanced part is, but every time I took it, I would take both parts. A lot of people give the read technique, they look at it from a bad perspective. And the reason they look at it from a bad perspective and it gets a bad name is because, like I told you before, the people doing it are doing it wrong. They'll take the course one time and they think they know it, or they'll get their little certification and go, yeah, okay, I got the retake. They won't do the advanced thing or anything. And they'll think they've got it figured out. Then it'll be 10, 12 years later, and they're still using what they think happened in the class or in the course, and they're doing it wrong. So when people badmouth the read technique, oh, it's bad because of the, yeah, because they're doing it wrong. But when you do it right, you don't have that problem because you can see through what's happening. Okay, it is aggressive, and it is, you do go in assuming the person has done whatever it is they've done, because sometimes, depending on the situation, you have to do that. But I talk good about the read technique because for me, what I did was I took all that stuff and I put it in the way I would approach it. I would approach normal interrogation once I learned about interrogation, because once Jason fired me off, or the guy whose name was, okay, Jason. So once he told me that, I learned all about it. I learned as much as I possibly could about interrogation and body language interrogation, just like that. For me, it just, everything fell into place. I was like, this is me. I found my thing, because there's two worlds that I love coming together. Now, if they had a thing where you made records and could do that too, then I'd be in nirvana. But so anyway, so that's when I got into interrogation. And back to the read technique, if you don't do it right, then that's why it gets a bad name. Now, the read technique, I liked it so much, I would do it every time that the read technique would come up for training. I'd go. And I'd go, sometimes 2 or 3 times a year when they'd come in. Did that forever, it feels like. I was all the time going down there and doing that. And when you go, you get certified for that. You get these certifications when you go, and you take the advanced class. Say, okay, shoot, you took this. Here's your certification. And I would frame them. And I had gold and platinum records on one side of the wall. And then I had all my read technique certifications on the other side of the wall. Right. And the thing about the read technique, when you go down there and when you do that, there's not a bunch of hacks in there learning that either. There are the FBI's in there. There are people from the Secret Service in there, Department of Defense in there, and they're all learning that technique of interrogation. So if you take the read technique, you get to train alongside these people. They're sitting right there. And what's good about that is, and what I realized from the first time I took that course, was you meet these people and you can say, hey, man, how do you guys approach this one? You can learn so much from them. And they'll tell you, because they know you're not a hack, because you're there too, learning where they are. And they want to tell you how they handle other situations and other interrogation situations. What happens? How you do this? What do you do? Plus, you make friends with them and you get to know them. That's how I got to introduced into those crowds of people, because you're there and they're there too, and you're training with them as you take these things, as you take various interrogation courses, if they're not, if they're the good ones, right? So in the read technique, I loved it, still love it to this day, because you can make that your own thing. You can take all that process, that setup, and you can put your own thing on it. You can take that protocol and you can put your personality into it, so you don't have to start off aggressively. You can start off so it's not aggressive, but you can throw those parts in when you need them. because you still follow that framework, which is what I do. But which allows me to train other interrogators outside of that. Not say I'm training the reading technique, because I'm not. I'm doing, when I do that, I train my own thing, right? But there are parts of that go into it, because there are parts of other interrogation trainings that go into that as well. But the read technique is my favorite. Anyway, so you get to train with all these guys. So you get to train alongside the FBI, Secret Service, Department of Defense. Everybody's there when you do it. So you make these connections. I'd have all my certificates up on the wall. And our rule at our house is the no-go records out of the studio. I don't have a studio anymore because I got rid of everything. But everything stays downstairs. Nothing comes upstairs where people are. Where people visit and things. I don't have no-go records, nothing like that. So those all stay down in the basement, as do my certifications. Those are all on the wall, but they're gold records. Now there is a bathroom upstairs where my wife put a bunch of my gold records and stuff. They're platinum records. It was in our bathroom. So, which doesn't bother me. That's fine. But she thought I should be prouder of those than I was. Not that I wasn't proud of them, I was, but, I don't know. But so the bathroom has a bunch of them in there. Other than that, no. But none of my certifications are in there. Interrogation thing, nobody care about that. I'm trying to think of something else for interrogation that would be, I could tell you. Because you're probably not into, maybe you are learn about interrogation, but we're talking about body language. So I think that's pretty much it. So that's where I am now, doing talks and things. I'm not training as much anymore because I'm trying to get out of that now. I'm not trying to get out of it, but it doesn't interest me as much as it used to. I still like doing it when it's important. And but I like giving talks. That's been, because you can do training while you're giving a talk to a company, depending on what it is. But I really like doing healthcare a lot, because I think those people are learning things. They're going to help people that were like me when I was scared to death, not be scared to death. So that would be important to me. So that's sort of where I'm focused now. Of course, we got our TV show coming up on Dr. Phil's network, Merit Street Media. We're doing that. And the body language channels, I still love doing those. And so I'm going to keep doing all that stuff, those things. But at the same time, I'm going to start focusing more on speaking gigs and not as much on training anymore. So that's my story, as long and boring as that is. And so many little offshoots and rants that go in there. That's in a nutshell, that's pretty much what it is. So if you want to be a body language expert, you can do it. Like I said before, it's all about studying, though. Whether you're in college or a university, study there too. But if you're not, you can still do it. You can still do it. It's not too late. It's not too much to learn. You got enough time. And if you read the right things and study the right things, you'll do great at it. And a new book will come out. And you know what happens when you get a new book? You look in the back and see where they got all their information, where those studies came from. And you get to find all that stuff out, and you've got more to learn. It's never ending. You get the basics, but then you build on those basics. That's the key. So you can do it too. You can do it too. You should do it. You should look into it. Get in. The water's fine. Come on, we're waiting on you. You should do it.